So I've got a BMW M3 E92, the S65 engine, and we're going to do some connecting rod bearings on this engine. So first things first, we'll take this oil filter out, let that all drain, and then we'll get it all up and drop the oil out from underneath. So I've got the microfilter housings off, because we've got to get the intake plenum off the top of the throttle bodies, and all these trims are in our way. So this is our first thing, and we need to unplug this bonnet switch. So we've got those top covers all off, and now we're going to start moving on to the strut brace. And there is one each side, held on with 13mm nuts and bolts. So I've got the airbox all out of the way, it feeds up to the plenum. And I've got both those strut braces off. So this side also has mounts for the wiring harness, and you can see where the strut brace would normally go over the top of the plenum. These two bolts are just for show, so don't undo them. And then we'll go ahead and unplug the intake air temp sensor. So now we can see the Jubilee clips that hold the plenum onto the throttle bodies. I've got all those loose. And there's also this breather hose that is clipped on. I use a long screwdriver to get these off. So we've got all this side in the same state with all those Jubilee worm clamps all undone. And this is now loose. So the last thing I'm going to have to do is this breather hose here. So if you just slide in where my finger is, a flat blade screwdriver. So here's the engine with the cover off. We need to squeeze this pipe off as well before we remove. And that's just the plug for the intake air temp. So there's that removed breather pipe. And I was just coming in and doing the equivalent of squeezing it, but I was pushing a screwdriver in for each side and just lifting these tabs on the sides here, one each side, just slide it in and wiggle the pipe off, and it does the same as if you were able to squeeze it. And now we come under the car, and there are two drain plugs on the S65 engine. There's one here, and we can see how close that sump is to the undershield. So these engine mounts are collapsed basically. So we'll be replacing those at the same time. Here are our engine mount nuts, one each side. We'll undo the bottom ones, and then we'll undo these ones up the top here. And it's the same on this side also, just a nut on the bottom, and then another nut on the top, which I've already got loose, which will help when we remove the subframe. So I've undone the drop links for the sway bars, one each side. And I've also got this trim removed. I just need to get this one bolt out, then we can access the subframe bolts. Got the tie rods undone from the steering rack, and all of our lower control arms. We just need to make sure the level sensor doesn't get caught. So we've got the engine support bar on, and just on the front hook. Then underneath I've just got this big axle stand with a piece of wood on the bell housing just for extra bit of safety, but it's not really doing a lot. Here's our subframe bolts, and we'll just undo all those. So I've got the power steering hose brackets all loose. I'm going to leave all that behind with the car. I've got all the subframe bolts half wound out. I've got the engine earth unbolted from the sump also. It's just this 13mm bolt that holds it on. So that subframe is now off. Got it supported top and bottom. Got the steering rack tied up onto the exhaust manifold, so it's not actually just hanging. You can see all the sump bolts. We're going to have to remove all these brackets out of the way to get the sump off. There's one more there as well. And like I said before, I've got the steering rack tied up to the exhaust manifold with a strap, so there's no weight just hanging on the steering shaft. And these are our sagged engine mounts. You might be able to see there, they're actually split as well. Bit of perishing going on. And I'll just show side by side to the new ones what they look like, because these will be fairly sagged in comparison. And our rounded out sump plugs. So we've got the bolts out the sump, load of T30 bolts, some up in these holes as well, all these little holes around the sump, more along the back. And we also need to get this bracket out of the way that holds the lambda probe wiring, 3 bolts holding that. And then we've also got this heat shield, so we'll need to take that heat shield out of the way, which covers the crank sensor. Got a plug off the oil level sensor. And there's also the bell housing bolts. The bottom 4 ones need to be undone. They go into the sump. So here we can see E14 or E12, I think they were. So we've got that crank sensor all unplugged, the bolts out from the bell housing. And our bracket all out of the way. So we'll be able to lower this sump down now. There we go, the sump is now off. We can see all our oil pump, pickup pipes, and our con rods, of course, what we're coming in here for. So we'll have to get these pickup pipes off out of the oil pump. If we look in the pickup, there is actually a piece of metal. This car's had a helicoil installed before, and this is the part of the threads from the original part of the sump. We found some of this in the oil filter also, so we're going to be making sure there's nothing in the oil pump. So we'll take this oil pump all off and get it stripped down. So a few of our bearings out already. You can see the wear, and the reason why you go in here to do this job. It is pretty much a service item on these M3s. Just a little bit of debris gone through the bottom ones. The top ones are always going to show the most wear, as we can see. And the crank is looking very nice and clean. So there's the oil pump split into 2 pieces. We're just looking for any signs of metal that have gone through it. Any damage. We're doing this because of that metal that's gone through from that previous helicoil repair. We want to make sure, as it's ended up in the filter, it's obviously gone through the oil pump at some point. So we've got the other half of the oil pump here. There doesn't appear to be any signs of damage, so we're going to wash it all out, get it cleaned up, and put it all back together. And there's the nut on the end of the shaft which holds the sprocket on. So we've got it all cleaned up and ready to reassemble. And here's our other half, the main section with the pump element. So we've got all our new bearings all laid out, 702s and 703s, genuine BMW and genuine BMW bolts. I would prefer to use ARPs though, as we'll discuss later. And our new engine mounts. So they're Lemforder branded, which is a very good brand. And just comparing new and old, we can see there's about a centimetre difference. So all our bearings laid out. Red is the 702 and blue is the 703. So they all update to the LCI. I believe it's an aluminium lined bearing instead of the copper of the original pre-LCIs. And as you can see, they are marked red and blue on the other side. and red being the bottom bearing, the 702 number, and top being the blue 703. So we'll just get this all laid out ready so we don't make any mistakes, and just for your own benefit and information. So we'll just spin this microfiber rag round. So we've got our blue on top. So assembly lube on the new bearings and a little bit on the bolts. So that's the first rod cap back on. And I just use a flat straight edge, a ruler basically, to make sure the bearings are level. They just need to be even each side. And you can just see where in situ on the bearings, the rod's just pushed up towards TDC. And the crank looking good again. Cleaned off any excess assembly lube, so there's none between the jointing surfaces. Just going to crack loose this set of rod bolts. Just show you how we separate the cracked style rods. Let's spin this bolt out a few turns, and then we'll push on the bolt and it will just separate the two halves of the con rod. Sometimes this will require a rubber mallet or similar. Now we can see the typical S65 excessive bearing wear. So when we get these bearings out, we'll have a look to see if they've gone down to the copper. One thing to note is that they do look reasonably even in their actual wear pattern, so no cause for concern. And here is our torque settings. You can see it is in 3 stages and it is repeated 3 times. So we've just finished the first set, so we're going to go ahead and undo the bolts again. Now this is BMW's spec of their torque setting. Torque it and do the first set, undo the bolts, torque it a second time, as we will do in a moment, undo the bolts, and then torque it again a final 3rd time. So again with our 6 Newton meters. And now we'll go to 20 Newton meters. Now we'll do our 130 degrees angle of rotation. So that's stage 2 done. Now we undo them again. So this is why I prefer to do the S65s with the ARP rod bolts, because you simply do them to 45 foot-pounds in foot-pounds due to it being an American company, and that's it. Do it once and that's it. None of this doing up, stretching the bolts, undoing the bolts 3 times. This takes a long time to do all 8 connecting rods, so ARP is my preference. So we're just going to do the final stretch to 130 degrees, and that will be the end of the rod bolts being tightened. Just got to repeat it 8 times on 8 connecting rods. So I've got all the oil pickup pipes reinstalled, and obviously the oil pump is all back on. New O-rings on the pickup pipes. And obviously clean that pickup out. So ready to put the sump on. Sump is on with a new gasket, and we're going to torque the bolts down. Just get them down to 10 Newton meters. And we'll go around and do all of them to 10. Just got the steering rack strapped back up again now. Ready to put the subframe on. So disable the engine from starting, do a crank to build oil pressure, then start the car up. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below.